Hi, I'm Dan Pertu, and for this next episode in my Muse in Music video blog, I am very excited to be talking with Alecia Lawyer, who is the founder, artistic director, and principal oboist of ROCO, a professional music ensemble that flexes from 1 to 40 musicians from around the United States and Canada, including guest conductors from around the world. Known as the most fun you can have with serious music, ROCO has been called a trailblazer and an arts disruptor, and is leading the sector in innovation. ROCO's debut album was recognized with a Grammy for Producer of the Year, Blanton Alspaugh. Performing dozens of concerts in multiple venues throughout Houston, Texas, ROCO concerts are broadcast nationally and have been live streamed for free since 2013 with 250,000 concert views during COVID. Calling her business model wildcatting in the arts, Ms. Lawyer is one of Musical America's top 30 influencers in 2015, named a finalist for Texas Musician of the Year along with Willie Nelson, who won, and was listed as one of Houston's top 50 most influential women. She regularly presents her innovative and entrepreneurial ideas throughout the United States, using ROCO as a case study for community-specific orchestra building. She is a proud senior fellow of the American Leadership Forum, serves on the board of the Houston Youth Symphony, and is a member of the Institute for Composer Diversity. Please join me for my conversation with Alecia about the inspiring work of ROCO and how it spotlights the human element. Okay, so I'm really excited to be talking with Alecia Lawyer from ROCO, and this is a chamber orchestra based in Houston, and we're going to talk again today about what is inspiring, particularly to her, as she, as the founder and the oboist in ROCO, and how new music, and of course its long and very interesting and comprehensive relationship with new music is inspiring. And I have to say, ROCO commissions new music all the time. It is, from what I last saw, 118 commissions of living composers, and #1 in the country for performance of works by women, and second in the country for performance of works by Black composers, and all yes, wonderful. And so we're very excited to be talking with Alecia this morning. So could you talk about this journey about commissioning new music, founding this orchestra dedicated to this mission?
Thank you. Well, sure. Orchestral positions, people don't necessarily know, are lifetime tenured jobs. You have to wait for someone to retire or die. And maybe across the nation, there are 2 openings a year for your own instrument. And I think people don't understand that getting into an orchestra is 50% harder than getting on a Major League Baseball team. So not even knowing that, I think the value of what we do is not in the normal conversation. And so that's difficult, right? So you graduate, I went to Juilliard, went to SMU for undergrad, and you really don't have anything to do except audition for jobs that don't exist. And so that's pretty depressing. And we were here for a while, and I was on that circuit, and then we actually wound up moving to France. And that's a big part of the story because my husband got his MBA there, and it really changed my view of music and what it was and what it could be in people's lives. It permeates the culture there, right? It's not just an aside like, let's go to a classical music concert. It is part of your world. And so when we wound up coming right back to Houston, which I was a little sad about because there were no openings really for work, I started having experimentation on what my career could be. I was a DJ for a classical station. I auditioned and didn't know what any buttons did, but knew how to say Buxtehude. And so they were like, and so that was important. And then I was taught at University of Houston for a little bit and had a studio, but then was a part of 3 chamber orchestras that started up and went down over kind of in tandem and over the course of about 10 years. I was oboist and personal manager, and it was great to see from the inside out what creating an orchestra, creating these things could be to a city. Because in Houston, ironically, other than the Houston Symphony and the other big organizations, there's a lot of chamber music, but there's not another orchestra or chamber orchestra or
Mhm.
professional group. It's crazy being the third largest city. So anyway, I was in these groups and I'd had my kids and we love Houston and I was deeply integrated in Houston. And this is important, deeply integrated in Houston as a human, not as an oboist. And so I'd been volunteering through Junior League. I was at the Holocaust Museum, which was a huge passion of mine, still is. All these different pieces of Houston that I collected in my own heart, I guess I could say. I haven't really said it that way before. And then I was ready to quit the oboe because I didn't see a future in that here, but I saw a future for my family. And I was going to be a real estate agent because I really like to sell things and can sell anything. So,
Mhm.
but my church renovated. And when I saw the drawings of St. John the Divine's renovations, it was truly like start an orchestra. And that was like, oh, okay. And I thought of people I wanted to play with and not pieces to play. And that's where it was based as human relationships, which is unusual in our world, which is sad too, but it's what it was based on. And I half the musicians now, there are 40 players, half are not from Houston. They fly in. And we perform now 26 concerts a year all throughout the city, chamber music and the full orchestras. And you're right, the commissioning became a big part of it. And I think it did start becoming a part of it early on because it was about the human factor of living people having dialogue. And music is only a language, it isn't something that's a tangible entity. And I think that's what's kind of creepy to me about how people talk about it sometimes is that music is this thing and it's not. And I think when you break that down and you realize it's just conversation, then things can change. Paradigm shifts can happen. So that's really how it started. That's where we are. I have a lot of things I could tell you about. One of all the experimentation we've done that's just been so exciting. But that's really the genus behind what has happened.
Sure. And so how did you build an audience, particularly when new music is such a significant focus of what you do?
Well, it wasn't right away, but I think the quality of what we did was apparent no matter what we were playing. But as we started having, I have relationships with composers and they're personal. I brought my friend Derek Bermel to come in, or I brought my friends who I'd known through conservatory or festivals. So again, it was the personal story that it's based on, not we're going to just shove new music down people's throats. That was not the idea. And while I have been involved in new music, I didn't realize so much, but I have. I mean, I recorded for John Cage. I got to talk to him, and these kind of instances with Focus Festival at Juilliard. It wasn't a passion, and even now, again, I don't say new music is a passion of mine. To me, it's the dialogue with humans who write music is what's my passion, and just that connection of the connection is my drug, and it's a serious drug. But as far as developing audiences, it's not about here's our product, let's thrust it out there and hope people show up. Or you ask your audience, what do you want to hear? We'll play it if you'll show up. Both of those to me are very broken models.
Mhm.
Instead, I would like for you to come to my house for dinner. Do you have any? I'm not even really going to ask you if you have any allergies because you know what? If you don't like nuts, don't eat that dish. That's kind of where I'm at. So it's like, come to my house, I'll make you food, and I know that you'll be, polite enough to eat things, but also really enjoy some things. And so we'll have that in common for the next meal we have together, I guess is how I talk about it. And I think that's really the goal and the one-to-one invitation. So I would say when I talk to people about how to build these kind of organizations, it's coffee, coffee, lunch, sometimes another lunch, coffee, wine every day for 17 years. That's
Mm.
what, and it's one to one to one to one. And once you build that, those kind of audiences don't leave. They ride with you through experimentation and interesting ideas, and they expect you to have the unexpected, which is kind of ironic.
So it's very much a relationship oriented um, group. And of course, you were saying that the other models are sort of broken models. And that interested me when you brought that up. I'm very curious, how could other older established orchestras sort of improve their approach based on what you've seen working with Roco?
Well, I think it's hard to shift that. I don't know that big orchestras actually have to do the nimbleness that smaller groups can, because I mean they are tasked, unfortunately and fortunately, with being the tomes of our time. I mean they have to hold the canon, right? They have to hold the canon in honor, and they do have to move forward, but it has to be more additive. Um, I think the biggest problem I see with the DEI stuff that we just do intrinsically, it's not something we have to layer on top of what we do, or the idea of new music is that it's everybody's afraid it's going to cut something else out. And instead of like replacing what was before, if you can just be an additive idea, then I think we're there, right? You don't say, well, we're not going to have a white composer, we're going to have a black composer. Instead, you're like, we're going to have both. we're going to, I feel like that's hard. And it's very funny because I didn't know we'd be first in the nation programming women composers. It was not a goal of mine to do that. And the same for last year, we had so many pieces based on climate change. I kept getting the question, are you a social justice orchestra?
Mhm.
And I was, no, composers are writing about what's on their heart and mind. And that's where we are right now. So that's not how I machinate this. But your question is a good one about how first you said about audiences. And I think when you give audiences and your musicians agency to have input, and that's really hard in bigger organizations because of the construct of it. There are a couple of tiny things that I did that have helped people digest new music in a more palpable, palatable way, both words. Um, and one thing was a complete accident. I could never decide the order of the concert until the last minute. And luckily, I've had these conductors who really fly with me and are happy to take my wild, crazy thoughts and just help me construct them. So they'll wait till the last minute and we'll have a conversation and say, yeah, let's do it a different way. And I said, well, why do we even put it in order in the program in the first place? So we started putting the program in alpha order. And that made a big difference because audiences, when we were first starting to do new music, didn't have a clue when the new music was coming. So, I mean, we told them, right, okay, now you're going to hear this, but they weren't kind of braced in their seats to hate the piece. Instead, they were expectations were of what's next. And that's a really great, is it a suspension of disbelief? Possibly. It's a suspension of expectation. There's this place that you get into of expectation of experience. And I need to write that down because I've never said that before. But expectation of experience is really important. And I didn't purposely do that, right? I didn't know that's what that would do. I'm trying to write it down and talk at the same of experience. Okay. And what happened was, like I said, people were not aware of when it was coming, and then they kind of received it better. But also timings of pieces. I cannot tell you, that would be the simplest thing. And I've seen some people start to do that. I need to know how long a piece is, even if it's a familiar piece that I don't really know well, even if it's something I've never heard before. My approach to hearing a 20-minute piece versus a 5-minute piece is very different. You know, if
Mhm.
you hate it and you got 20 minutes, you set yourself in, right? You're
Yeah.
like, all right, I got 20 minutes. And I did a kind of a mind thing with people. I had this piece that was a little too long. Someone wrote, I will not say who, and it was 31 minutes long, which was way over what I asked for.
Ooh.
And I will, I know, yeah, I'm not going to say who. And I was supposed to be like 17 minutes. Okay. So I put both movements in there, and I put that the first movement was 9 minutes. First movement was 19 minutes, and the second movement was 9 minutes, which does not add up to 31. But your expectations, all right, 19, I'm there. Okay, 9, I'm there. It's a perception, you know? So that's
Yeah.
just kind of, it's a Jedi mind trick. That's what it is.
I love it. Well, you said a couple things. First, about the pieces being in alphabetical order. So, do audience members get a program,
Oh, yeah.
or they do?
Yeah, yeah, and
Okay.
yeah, a very, very dense one, very thick one that
Okay.
has a lot of things. It even has like a flyover sheet to show where musicians come from. But one of the most important things, I wish I had one with me right here. If I don't, I no, is we have a seating chart
Mm.
so that you can see it's not just like the name of somebody and what their instrument is, it's where they sit. Yeah, I don't have one sheet, but it's where they sit in the orchestra. And what I really think is important, all of these years we've recorded every single concert we've ever played, and we've left it up for free listening. I paid for all the media rights all these years, millions of dollars that now is all free up to listen. What's a really important piece of that is if you go to our listening room and you click on a concert, you can click on the PDF of the seating chart and know who is playing on that piece.
Oh,
No
yeah,
one does.
yeah,
No one. Not fair. I mean, back in the day, you would hear something and go, "Oh, Cleveland, these years, that's John Mack," or you know what I mean? But no one does that now, and it's like orchestras have become this generic cookie cutter type thing, which is not fair because every musician is an individual in there, and I don't think there's any harm in highlighting that, and that's what we really try to do.
yeah. And of course, that moves away also from this hierarchical model too, where you have the conductor, and of course everyone knows the conductor, and then you have um, the musicians, which are a sea of black and white, or even if they're not black and white, then it's a sea of all black or whatever, but it's anonymous in their dress and everything. And then you of course have the composer, which okay, that's fine and understandable, but knowing of course who the solo oboist or the trumpeter or whoever, this is really quite wonderful. I think this is something, it would be great to see other orchestras adopt this. It ties in, of course, obviously, to your human theme, right? These are real people. And going back to what you were saying about the composers, and you mentioned the alphabetical order again, and the new music, and how that all works. So there may be names that are unfamiliar to people on the program, but of course you've developed this trust with the audience, right? So they know that no matter what happens in this new piece, because there is this human relationship with you and with the orchestra, and with the way it all works, that there will be it will be an interesting and possibly amazing experience. So the trust factor and the human factor contributes to all that. Is that an accurate understanding of what you're doing?
Absolutely perfect. And my biggest word is curiosity. If you can get in that state of curiosity, and you might actually have a terrible experience. You might actually not like a piece, and to get the permission to not like a piece is a huge thing, right? People need to know like that. I mean, one of my favorite things was this from one of our years. Cultivate
Yeah,
curiosity, and like
yeah,
you sea of black. I mean, my orchestra, we wear bright colors, in the orchestra. And just, yeah, the fact that it's supposed to be fun is not a bad word in our industry. I even call it shows sometimes. I'm like, come see our show. And, you know, it's just a silly kind of wordsmithing thing that we always worry about. But you said something interesting I want to comment on, it moving away from the hierarchical thing. I do a lot of consulting, and I do a lot of this now, talking to people about starting a group, start talking about how to keep moving forward in a group or changing or whatever. And there is a point where there's a tension, just like anything. There's a tension between being casual in a concert and being sloppy, or being cavalier and not caring. I mean, there's this tension that is important for being in classical music, because you've got to have the highest artistic quality. That's huge. But then once you're there, you can let go and be vulnerable and be approachable and personable and accessible. So there's
mhm,
also a tension in hierarchy, in my opinion. Then that, yes, the management versus musician versus the only person broadcast or anything's the conductor has to be brought down. But you can't go so far as to have a kumbaya like by committee orchestra either. That doesn't go forward either. So there is again that tension of finding leaders or a leader to cast the vision. I talk about casting the quest and having people come on the journey with you. And then slowly now I'm starting to grow, Scott St. John's now the new artistic partner with me next year, our concertmaster. Mayan Shen has been our first artistic partner. So really growing the structure around my ideas that they are now involved in deeply for their ideas, letting musicians curate their own chamber concerts, not letting, but asking them to do so. But there is a tension point where somebody has to be the one that says no, or yes, or here's an idea, let's run with it. So I think that's there is too far the other direction is, I guess, my point.
For sure. I mean, there has to be a balance, because without some kind of vision, then you just sort of have this chaos, right?
Right.
Yeah. But I love seeing with your picture, of course, the concert dress, the atmosphere. Can you talk a little? Yes, thank you. Can you talk a little bit about the how the atmosphere, maybe the mise en scène or whatever you want to call it, that you cultivate for your audience, helps with audience growth and retention? Because I'm very interested in this because also it's an aspect of humanizing the orchestral experience. And while, Kumbaya may not work, the austerity of all black may also be a problem. And it sounds like, you're moving in this new direction, or at least this direction that a number of groups have done successfully. And again, humanizing this art form without losing its special quality at the same time. So could perhaps you talk about that, and also how new music then works into that?
Sure. Well, I mean, individually, you can't get more individual than picking your own clothes. I mean, right? It's not a uniform. And that comes with rife with trouble too, when people's ideas of formal are very different, and guys are stuck in their zoot suits a little bit. But I have one guy who wears sparkle shoes, which is fabulous, and it started with just shoes. Like, I've made them wear fancy crazy shoes, and now it's all colors all the time. And what's funny to me is groups have now gone toward again, more casual on stage type thing. We went exact opposite. We are formal every single concert, like New Year's Eve gala type concert every single time on stage. And it's just, people want to see joy and happiness and beauty, and it's fun, and you can then be a human in that. I don't know, it really bothers me that if you get too casual on stage, it just feels strange to me. And so this whole thing of individuality and yet coming together as a group because you're friends, it's like you don't have to be the Borg, you don't have to be the iRobot thing. You can be your individualness and still come together with a much more beautiful kaleidoscope of color than that. So as far as new music goes for that, what that also helps is, we all realize that during COVID, you can't Zoom with Beethoven. And it's what I've said for many years now. And Zooming with living composers and talking to them and having them have input directly with musicians, and having musicians be able to text a composer and say, okay, did you really mean to write this? Or what does this mean? And it's not just the conductor. I think one of the things that I've required, and I just was on Zoom yesterday with John Weinglass. We're commissioning him for a couple of years from now. And I was talking to him because I have trouble with publishers for what I require in ROCO, because no one requires this. I require that they put the inspiration and story and program notes for the piece on every musician's part. And you think that's like not a big deal? It's completely revolutionary, which is ridiculous. But the fact that I would say maybe 5% of conductors will get on the podium and tell the group what a piece is about, as opposed to they usually just get up, start waving their wand, and oh, I guess I meant their stick, but then the musicians just playing notes have nothing to do with what the composer wrote. And so the true vision doesn't happen. And also we have the thing called ROCO Resound, which is our commissioning consortium. And I also require that block of names to be on the musicians' parts. Musicians are the ones who, half of them live here or have the relationship with the donors, not the conductor who comes in and out. And that, you have no idea that amount of fight I have to do to get that to happen. I have to pay more money just to have an extra page in the program, the parts, which we don't even need physically because we have PDFs. So I don't understand. That's a whole nother podcast. Okay.
It totally is. Yeah. Although I'm a big fan of PDFs and iPads.
Right. We do that. So why do you have to charge me more to take another page in your you know what I'm saying? They're saying, oh, it's going to cost more because we have to add a page to the parts. I'm like, it's PDFs, it doesn't matter. And they're like, oh, we don't do PDFs, so they have to ship us the physical parts that we then scan. Anyway.
Yeah. No, which I totally can understand how that works. Well, and so talking more about, yeah, you were saying you can't Zoom with Beethoven. So maybe we could talk a little bit more about the process of the actual collaborative process. So as a composer myself, I've had the experience of working with a lot of different kinds of conductors now, and some are very hands-on and just invite me to all the rehearsals and want me to just come and interact and ask questions. But I'm always still very careful about being respectful, because you don't want to have step on people's toes, and that can be a very complicated dynamic right there. And then other conductors I've worked with really want to study the score and do everything, even rehearsal for a while, and then bring me in at the end or something, and for a dress rehearsal for commentary, which has its yeah. So can you talk a little bit about that process? I have a feeling I know where you're going to go with this, but I would love to hear what you do.
Well, and then same for our side, same for my side of it. And we've actually done 127 world premieres, and we have 7 more, so we'll be at 134 next year. But in all of those things, first of all, you need to know that only one piece was late and not on time, which is amazing, right?
Yeah.
And that's not 127 different composers. I probably need to count. I mean, I would say we do recommission people, and so it's probably 80 different composers, but each one of them is, again, human and different, and some can speak to an audience and most can't. I'll just say that composers are terrible at speaking to audiences. You'll all need some training in that. At least some of you do. But I think I, of course, want them to be involved as deeply as possible, and I think it's a waste of time to come at the dress rehearsal. It's already done.
Yeah.
I mean, by that time, if you have something to say, then you're done. You shouldn't say it. I'm just saying, it's kind of pointless. Plus, it freaks out the musicians. It's a dress rehearsal, this silly thing. So, no, it's funny. I vacillate between, and I usually just go with my gut on the personality of the composer, whether to invite them to the very first rehearsal. The ones I know that are collaborative, I will absolutely invite. The ones that I know that are going to take way too much time, or be too picky on our first read through, I probably ask them. I mean, it has to be with my gut, because sometimes I don't know. But either, I much prefer them to be there the whole entire time. The other thing that I've done all these master classes for composers. I would love to do it for next year's league as well, if you guys would let me, to talk about my side of what I need as composers. Is what drives me crazy is after the first rehearsal, they'll come back the second rehearsal and get on the podium and start saying, trumpet in measure 42, you need an F instead of an E and stuff like that. I'm like, you will not waste our time. You either give errata by a piece of paper the night before, or you're too bad, those kind of things. So I say I really would like for them to be involved. And yeah, I mean, especially the conductor, there is that dynamic. I would say with Rocco, the conversation while the conductor is leading it is more with the individual musicians, and so that's probably feels different to a lot of composers. I mean, once they know us, it doesn't, but it's more you're writing for a chamber group than a chamber orchestra, even though we are a huge orchestra too. So yes, I would love for the composers as a human to be involved in the dialogue from the beginning, for sure.
And I have to ask, you piqued my curiosity. So composers are terrible at talking to audiences. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, I will never give a composer a microphone. I mean, I will ask you a question, but I will never hand one to you, because I've had it happen at least 3 times where there's conductor just said, why don't you tell us about your piece, and handed the mic. And, oh my God. I mean, it was like program notes times 12, right? And I mean, I almost had to get on my seat and go stop it. I almost was there. And then it happened twice like that. And then the other time, the conductor handed the mic to this guy who basically said, I was born in 1965. Like,
oh my.
So it's either that, too much, too long-winded, or absolutely having nothing to say. So there's just got to be kind of a succinct, you need training just as much as we do on radio to be succinct in what you're trying to say. that's difficult to have. I mean, I think you need to practice like 15 seconds about your piece, 30 seconds about your piece. Like do
The
that kind
elevator pitch, so to
of,
speak. Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
If it's a tall building elevator or if it's a short one, you know.
Right. Right. Yeah. And of course, there's also the what you're talking about, the production of parts, and how now a lot of us are trained, that are trained that the parts must be perfect and you don't want to waste anyone's time. And we completely understand, the problem of time is so limited. I don't know if that's true universally, though. You might get people who don't. But those kinds of mechanics and nuts and boltsy things, are also very important for the whole working relationship. So on the one hand, you do have the human element, but then you also have the discipline, and it certainly has to be a balance. And then you were mentioning also the issue with the way conductors want to work. You have conductors working with individual musicians, and so how can you talk, maybe if you do invite a composer to maybe a second rehearsal or whatever, what does that look like? Is it the conductor talking with the musicians, and then maybe a little bit of quiet commentary from the composer? Or is it, can you give us a behind the scenes peek at this process? Or is it more of a dialogue between the conductor and the composer, also in real time, while the conductor is talking to the musicians? What does that look like?
Big mix of that. I mean, again, personality of composer, right? There are some composers who just whisper and don't really have that presence to come up on the podium. But we're always inviting them up, and it depends on the conductor. I mean, Alistair Willis is a forensic score reader. Like, he finds all of the errata before we get to first rehearsal. So does Mayanne Chen and Brett as well. They're forensic, and it's fabulous. So that's helpful. But the nuts and bolts of that, I mean, it's not irritating to us if there's things like a missed note or a missing something. What's really hard is when like measure numbers are off, or, I mean, those things that's critical. But obviously that's super basic, but sometimes it happens. And like I was just saying, that the communication factor just needs to be, it's much better if the communication from you as the composer is about the essence of the piece, how that brought out different ways, even if it's minusculely, not about the technical things of the piece. But no, we've had everything from like Aaron J. Kernis sat in the back of the hall listening to his piece and talked to Sarah Hicks, and then they had a conversation while we talked amongst ourselves, and then she came up and said stuff. And then we've had Derek Permel, who's basically like, everything's great, don't need anything. I mean, he's pretty cavalier after he has a piece played. He's like, yeah, it's fine. To a couple of very nitpicky composers coming up and being a little bit, which I like. And it's not about, oh, the F is wrong. It was more like, this part, if you could bring this out because this really matters at this moment, that kind of thing. It's so welcome and exciting to know that. What would be helpful though is I don't mind that in the part that you guys are more Mahler-esque or Prokofiev than otherwise, right? You need to say, you are now the woman who's walking across the field. Please start putting that stuff in there.
Yeah.
Wish that more composers would do that.
Yeah, and that's a really helpful comment, because there are multiple schools of thought on that, of course, and I'm sure there are composition teachers out there who will say, no, just write the music, and don't go after the imagery. There are composers who probably think, well, that doesn't really fit into my aesthetic. And I can respect those points of view, but if there is that imagery there, I think that's wonderful, hearing that musicians want to read it. I think some of us are actually a little afraid that that will be made fun of for putting some imagery, the flowers or the bunnies or whatever.
Unless you could make it your thing, right? Like it becomes like it's Easter eggs that you're hiding in the group. That's what I think.
Yeah, no, for sure.
I mean, you could be known for that. So
absolutely.
You ever read Mad Magazine? You're younger than me, but do you know Mad Magazine?
I'm aware. Yeah.
So do you know that they have these little hidden, tiny little cartoons throughout the magazine. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I'm
Yeah.
talking about.
No, I mean, and so it certainly my point of view, I think, on this is whatever helps the musicians convey the artistic vision.
Yeah.
And whether if the piece is a really austere, high modernist kind of piece, and the artistic vision is about that, then maybe the graphic notation is all you need, for example. On the other hand, if it's a more neo-romantic programmatic piece, then yeah, maybe it's appropriate to talk about the shepherds in the fields or something.
But I would say the high art thing though too, that's different too. Why not just say that? Say that this is more a pristine high art, and the sound that I would provide as an oboist would be more not metallic is not the right word, but more crystalline and
Mm.
better, And so those kind of words can come into high art, not talking about the bunnies, but talking about the color you're expecting. I think there's a lot more verbiage that I think composers could use than just our standard stuff that is not silly. That is, I mean, the word crystalline, I think those words should appear for our own imaginations. Because I do think if you're not used to new music, that sometimes you don't know how to approach a piece. Right, and that's what's interesting, and we give a lot more time than most to as a traditional orchestra, we give a lot more time to this than most, so you get like at least 2 rehearsals on the piece and then the dress, and that's a lot for a symphony run.
Oh, that's absolutely incredible, of course. And yeah, I mean, having these adjectives or these phrases, it makes the process more efficient. And then also, because this musicians can study it in advance, of course, but also it hits on the continuous theme through our entire conversation, which is about humanizing the process, which certainly I would imagine would deliver a better artistic product. I was wondering about advocating for new music, particularly in terms of diversity of styles. So we had touched on that a little bit earlier, and I remember you had said something about maybe you're allergic to peanuts, so then don't eat peanuts or whatever. So it sounds like there's a diverse array of aesthetics or styles of music that you program. Is that, for example, before I go further with the question, is that accurate? I mean, is there a diversity? It's eclectic in terms of style?
Yeah, I mean, our opening concert in September, we have a Vietnamese ballad. We have the Juan Pablo Contreras' Marichitlin. We're having an actual mariachi band play ahead of his piece to kind of give it more character flair so that people understand his piece, not give it more character, but get people to relate to it understandably more. And then we have a guitar concerto by Michael Abels, who did the music for Get Out. And then we have Beethoven 5. So you cannot get more.
Yeah, exactly. And so then when there might be something, let's say, that isn't as immediately accessible to the audience, is there a way that you prepare audiences for it, or is it more just it's just there, it's a part of it, that's it?
No, it's true. That's good. So there's a lot of things to this. We have an app that we have the audience use, and I pick one piece on the program, we use it, and it's called Live Note, and our percussionist, who's hilarious, writes commentary about the piece. Now, it is not program notes. It is like David Berkowitz style, okay? And it is usually or more like VH1 pop-up video style, where he'll take a theme and run with it. One example was and sometimes this is on a Mozart symphony where people can zone out a little bit. Sometimes, and so he writes stuff like, oh, this movement's so fast, wind would be whipping through his hair driving in a convertible, but wait, he'd have a wig on. And then he went down this whole rabbit hole about wigs. And so your audience is laughing during Mozart, which is my favorite thing ever. And some people are like, oh, it's distracting. I'm like, no, it's not. And for us, our house lights are up as well, so we don't have to worry about phones shining or anything like that. But that's one tiny piece of what you're talking about. And the other way is, of course, the program notes. We don't have thick ones. We have bullet points, and it's called Buller points. Mark Buller writes them. And he writes them again, kind of like, here's how do you do more exploration, here it is. But also the composer sometimes will talk about the piece as well, or the conductor will turn around and talk about it and say what it is, and do demonstrations if it needs to be. Just like, here's this cool water wheel thing you have to hear, or things like that. And we have, luckily now, we've kept, because we leaned so hard into live streaming. We were live streaming in 2013, so we didn't have to pivot in COVID, and
Right.
instead added more cameras. And now we have this huge boom that goes over the orchestra like this, and we've kept it even with audiences. So the audiences sort of feel like they're at SNL when they're behind, the scenes, kind of, for what we do for our concerts. But my point is that they can get so into, like, right in your face about whatever instrument that is. And so they, during the piece that's new, that visual element that's on a screen really helps to get in. Oh, look at that. Oh, look at this. So it is a little bit like being an ADD adult. I mean, unmedicated. That's kind of what I program like. But I think it's really just, okay, so here's the example. When that piece was written, that's 31 minutes long, I actually put it first on the program.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, we're just gonna do it, and then we're gonna move on, And it was a difficult piece to listen to, and then we moved on, and it was interesting, and it was really worthy. I'm not saying that, but it was very hard. It was like eating a massive steak first, And I just like, oh, we're doing it. It's just gonna happen. So I think there's that way. You figure out where it goes. It can't just be kind of like, when priests give sermons, it's supposed to be what, 3 points in a poem or something. Their sermons. Well, it's kind of like that, right? With orchestras, it's overture, new piece, overture, concerto, new piece, symphony. I mean, that's kind of the prescribed. Never do I do that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I can't say never, but one time there was a piece. We had 3 pieces on a program that were very difficult to listen to, and hard to take. And so I also had a Haydn symphony. So what I did is I broke up the Haydn symphony. We played the first movement piece, second movement piece, third movement piece, ending with the last movement of Haydn. And so Haydn is our palate cleanser.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's just ways like that you can do it.
Mm-hmm.
And then if a piece is incredibly hard to take, and there isn't a programmatic element, and there is not visuals, that's probably the piece I would ask Matt to write the live note about, so that you would be reading commentary about the piece while receiving it. So there are ways to manage it.
Wow. I mean, listening to this, I'm really just inspired about what's going on, and of course I've read up on what Rocco does, but someday when I'm in Houston, I want to come to a performance. But
for free any day. We've been live streamed in 6 continents except Antarctica, and that is coming once a friend goes down to do research.
well, yeah, there you go, and then you'll have all 7. And yeah, I've seen some of the live streams, so that of course is amazing. I don't mean to
no, in person, it's important. Relationships.
Yeah, and live performance, I mean, yeah, okay, live stream is good, but nothing beats a live performance. At least that's my view. So, yeah.
So, well, and I think the other thing I wanted to tell you about the new music, which I think is fun, and about the QR code project that we've done. But it's this, I'm going to just show it for the audiences at home. There's a huge trail that we started with Rocco and the Go for, and we put QR codes along the trails to our music. So basically littered Houston with our music. And now we're in 20 different partners in hospitals, schools, parks all over Houston. Various things, either playlist, Black composer playlist at Emancipation Park we're working on, or a Jewish composer Holocaust Museum, on and on. And I say this to say that we're also in Precinct 2, which is outskirts of Houston, where people may not even have a car, okay? In places that are completely inaccessible for arts. And what's fun to me, and incredibly important, is these people scanning the codes that are joyful, bold, and soothing type codes. They're listening to Ikegwanu, Nigerian composer, on the same playing field as Mozart. Or they're listening to Lisa Bialava, or they're listening to Rina Esmail. It's all the same to them in the best possible way. So that has become an equalizer that could never have been predicted that would be the outcome.
And I love seeing programs like that where you have multiple distinct cultural contexts, but they're all in the same,
Right.
they're on the same program. It's
Yeah.
great.
I was going to
And
show you.
then,
Go ahead.
yeah, and then you're bringing it to so many different regions. I mean, Houston is it's a giant city and it's diverse. So of course, bringing it to very diverse areas. And there it is.
So yeah, these are the three. We put our entire playlist into
Maybe
three.
move it back a little, it's a little
Oh,
blurry. It's okay. Okay, yeah.
so it's three mood based. We broke our entire playlist of 17 years of music into joyful, bold, and soothing. And even a Haydn symphony can break into those three buckets. And then it randomizes if you scan it, but you can also just stay in that. And so that's what we put, kind of choose your musical adventure all over Houston. So
Well,
great.
another reason to go to Houston, not
Yeah.
just do the live stream, right? Go
Yes.
there and experience it. So,
Yeah.
well, thank you so much for this absolutely fabulous conversation. And I particularly enjoy learning about all these wonderful, inspiring things you're doing. And I can certainly say it, and it's just my humble opinion, but this should serve as a model for so many other organizations where they can take some of these ideas and then make them, it's like Stravinsky said, you don't borrow, in fact, you steal. So that you steal the idea and you make it your own. You don't give it back.
Right.
So steal the idea, make it your own, make it what works for the community. And which isn't to put down what other people are doing, but it's to say, I think there's so much more that could be done in orchestra space. And there's some incredible ideas here, particularly inspiring ideas with new music, particularly with the idea of increasing the size of the pie, so to speak, involving more and more living composers from diverse backgrounds, and doing it in a way that doesn't seem, like a win-lose kind of game. And so all of this, I think, are great ideas that others can learn from. So thank you so much for your time today and for talking with me.
Thank you very much for opportunity.